he passed away a few years back, but he's considered the father of Romanian jazz. And he has been my mentor, and he's very much appreciated even now in Romania. And I think it's a good way to pay my respect to him. The piece is it's called My Little Suede Shoes by Charlie Parker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bună seara. My name is Magda Stroia. I'm the acting director of the Romanian Cultural Institute here in London, and I'm delighted to welcome both our small audience here tonight and our online public. When we were forced to cancel our events back in March, Romania's participation at London Book Fair was one of our main casualties. We were deeply saddened to miss out meeting the Romanian authors and publishing professionals, but please spare a thought also for the five-star hotels, champagne boutique producers, and limousine drivers who were counting on that lucrative opportunity. My memory could be wrong, but I seem to remember their sorrowful lamentations being reported on the front page of the Daily Mail under the headline, "The Romanian writers are not coming." Tonight's literature rendezvous, inspired by the launch of the Romanian Riveter, the first British literary magazine dedicated to Romanian literature, feels to me like another step in a process of necessary reparation. On one level, it offers the public a chance to hear about and meet their literary heroes. Especially in the current context, I'm sure everybody rejoices whenever the arts bring us together. On a more general level, it is about the status of the Romanian literature in the English-speaking world. It is a reality that, for various reasons, there is an imbalance, and many Romanian authors are puzzled by the perceived lack of interest by the British book trade when it comes to their books, especially by comparison with Romanian success in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. We suggest Romanian literature can benefit through effective dialogue with people with a deep understanding of the UK publishing industry. The fruits of such a collaboration we celebrate tonight with the launch of the Romanian Riveter. It is an attractive, dynamic magazine for which the European Literature Network, its director and founder Rosie Goldsmith, and her dedicated team, and the magazine's contributors deserve many congratulations. We are honored to offer a warm welcome to Rosie and her guests tonight. The Riveter magazine of European literature was created by Rosie in 2017. She hosted and helped launch European Literature Night at the British Library for nearly 10 years and has created a host of original events and festivals to raise the profile of writers and artists from across Europe. In addition to her work with the European Literature Network, Rosie was chair of the judges for the EBRD International Literature Prize for 3 years. Rosie's background is as BBC broadcaster, where she was on the staff for 20 years. She is a Sony Award-winning journalist specializing in arts and foreign affairs. She has interviewed many of the great names in culture and current affairs. So you are in good hands tonight. Just before handing over to Rosie as your host for what we expect to be a memorable evening, a quick word for me to say that I will rejoin Rosie after the event on stage for a major announcement regarding a very exciting festival. Rosie, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Wow. This is also a great opportunity to say thank you to Magda too. I had dreamed for several years to create a Romanian magazine, as you probably know, all of you, because every single one of you in this room has some kind of contact or connection with the magazine or with what we've been doing. It took me 2 years to raise the money, and we are very grateful to our friends in Timișoara who in the end funded this magazine, and to the RCI obviously for hosting us in this beautiful, I've always imagined glittering ballrooms and Romanian blouses and limousines and all those things that Magda thinks that I enjoy all the time. But I'm so proud of this magazine, and you've each got your copy there, probably more than any other, and I say that each time, I think, because the difficulties of putting magazines like this together, they seem to get more difficult rather than easier. But maybe that's okay, because we feel so proud when we actually get there. As you can tell, I've been using this one for many different notes and all kinds of things as well. But it's you'll also need it as your reference guide for tonight, because we've got a whole host of wonderful readings. We've got prose, we've got poetry, we've got drama, we've got live conversation, live physical conversation with real authors and all of you. And we've had live music for the first time. This is the first live event also here at the RCI since lockdown. So there are numerous firsts, which makes it very, very emotional, I think. And I know you're all spaced out and so on. I'd love to say, draw closer, but I can't. And it's great to see you all. Really, really wonderful. So you need to use the magazine as reference, because we treasure translation. Of course we do, and today is International Translation Day, so happy Translation Day to all the translators here. And but we, obviously we can't put every single translation up on screen, so you'll need that for some of the translations, unless you happen to be multi or bilingual. And then you'll find there are lots of videos as well. And what we've managed to do this evening is to provide a flavour of literature across Romania, and which is something quite remarkable, I think. So some of the clips will be quite short, but every single one is a fuller is a fuller video, which you can then go to. We have two websites running side by side. We've got the RCI website, we've got the European Literature Network website. You can go and watch all the films in full with introductions by either me or Gabriella Morkan and Tudor Cretu and so on. And we're all, you know, it's all there. So don't be put off if you think, oh my God, I've only got 3 minutes of that one and she had 2.5, and you know, don't worry, it's all fair in love and war. And I'm just going to very briefly say my links to Timișoara and to Romania. I do need to tell you that so that you can trust me, okay? I don't just wear the blouse, which I'm trying very hard. None of you do, so I might as well wear them. None of the true Romanians wear them. And I've got my red amber bracelet on. I would wear full Romanian regalia if I could, but I think I'd look a little bit over the top. But I really love Romania, and it's a country I got to know just after Ceausescu was executed, January 1990. I was there with the BBC. And we've got a very special guest who's going to talk about that time as well tonight for her. But it's a place that means so much to me. And you'll find a little exclusive in our magazine as well that I wrote. It was actually a journal that I wrote at the time, which I've never, ever exposed or published anything like that before. And then I went to Timișoara, I went to Cluj, and went all over for the BBC. I was really lucky. But I went to Timișoara a couple of years ago because I met this man called Tudor Cretu. And if you've met Tudor Cretu, you never refuse Tudor. How many of you know Tudor Cretu? Yeah, well, you know, Stephen, Josephina, we've all been there. Susie, have you been to Timișoara to the festival? You'll get the invitation. And Anna Blazak, who I work with, we've been to Timișoara, and it was just a blast. And Tudor immediately said, it's one of the most interesting cities I've ever visited. It's completely multicultural, multilingual, really interesting part of Romania. And he said, oh, we will find the money, Rosie. And of course, like 2 years later, okay, Tudor, right, how about now? He did find the money. It's also because, as you know, Timișoara is going to be the European Capital of Culture. Should be 2021, who knows, probably going to be postponed. But that's how we were able to enjoy his munificence, if you like. So I'm now going to say, come in Timișoara and Litvest 2020, and the first film of the evening.
Okay, come on.
We are here to, so to speak, launch, to celebrate the first British literary magazine dedicated entirely to Romanian literature, and especially to the literature that is being written in Timișoara. The empty chairs, those which are empty, are a strategic, so to speak, a defining accent of this edition of the festival, in the sense that we try to deal with this issue of the presence or the absence in flesh and bones of the public from the events now, but not only during the pandemic, because this problem precedes and will outlast the pandemic.
I'm a writer and manager of the Untitled County Library. So I live and work in Timișoara. As a poet, I I have the privilege and I have the chance, and it's also a challenge, obviously, to use my imagination in managing the library, which means also, or perhaps mainly, organizing or imagining or conceiving cultural events in a different, in an unconventional way. And this is what we try to do through Litvest, which is a festival. This festival includes premieres, it includes unconventional public readings, unconventional events, which almost all focus on the public, which try to include the public in such a way that the public is a key player of the event, not just a witness. It's not. It's about having an active, not a passive role in this general equation. The Riveter is one of the projects our library has been working on this year, and it offers an image, I think a relevant image of what Timișoara means from a literary perspective, of what it has meant, means, and hopefully will mean. The authors included in the selections I made, belong to various generations of the last, let's say, 50 years, starting with Untitled, for instance. And obviously, any selection is incomplete, but nevertheless, this is, I hope, relevant. This is the Riveter, the Romanian, the Timișoara issue. It's like posing for the police after committing a crime with your picture. I will read a poem now, a poem which is in fact an exorcism I wrote some years ago. And this is part of a wider project. I also work on a novel about an exorcism which I have recently finished. This text is from a book called Continuous Fragments Live Poems, which was published in 2014. So let me exercise you. This entity, blind and swarthy, locomotive, coal steam, something stuck on the inside like a sticker, a wild beast chased away with the shovel. Let me invoke it, spit it between the eyes. It's nothing but a ball of fur and a leper's grin, steam rising from a gory wound. Let me call it, hit it with the poker. Let us clash in gardens, in open air. Where are you, come out? Where are you, come out? The smell of charred cauldron, of a funny gypsy coppersmith, soot and ashes of an old hut. Come out, crawl and go back to the open manhole. I shall poke the effigy deep in your flesh, the effigy burning on the grill. I shall scorch your fur, your fat rolls. You will run like a mutt, hit with an old shoe. Your hiss, louder than any brake screech. Come out. This is a kind man's shelter. It is the world's house and the town in the postcards. Red candles burning instead of furnaces. You are a whirlpool, a toxin, deluge and tremor. Come out. These are the teachings on the whitest sheet of paper. Come out. Let me spit and wring my shirt, my dirty rags out. You do not exist. You do not exist. You do not exist. You're but a painting on the carpet we wipe our feet on. Come out. Shrink, wriggle, and spring out through my ears, my nostrils, or better, my head. In that moment, under a ceiling covered in bronze candelabra, shining in broad daylight, I'll stand smiling, fading. And if need be of tremor, let it be now. And if need be of an earthquake, let the shore collapse now. And if need be of a fire, let my barn burn down now. It is the Lord's meadow here, and the Sundays have only mornings. Come out. The clean air will suffocate you. Come out. The women's scarves are all white. Come out. The sound of the keys is the invocation. The little hammer that drives you crazy, that flattens your skull. Come out of the smoker's lungs and the darkness of the smoking houses. Come out, you old hag, you shrew wagging your tail, leave a round hole behind in the window, like a bullet, like a projectile. This is the house of the handcomes and kindness, of plain garments and clean asses. Come out. You have come out.
Apoi am văzut-o pe doamna Bovary murind în film. Pielea albă de porțelan, abia murind dorea să trăiască. Apoi jurnalele TV cu oameni cu măști și mănuși de protecție. Toată planeta poartă măști. Străzile pustii ale orașelor, oameni îmbrăcați în combinezoane albe, nu li se văd ochii, nu li se văd mâinile. Ambulanțele urlă pe străzi, la știri doar asta vezi, coloana sonoră a zilelor noastre. Apoi imagini cu căprioare plimbându-se pe străzile orașelor europene. De frică oamenii se filmează cântând și râzând, de frică oamenii se filmează îmbrăcați în haină de stradă, luând metroul în baia lor personală. De frică oamenii se baricadează în case, dormind între munți de conserve și role de hârtie igienică. Apoi papa, singur în piața Sfântul Petru. Obosim cu toții în același timp. Pielea mâinilor ustură e uscată, ne spălăm compulsiv, fiecare centimetru trebuie frecat mai mult, mai pune se pun, mai, nu e îndeajuns. Nu pune mâna pe clanță, nu te atinge de nimeni, nu te îmbrățișa cu nimeni, nu săruturi, treci pe celălalt trotuar, nu urca în tramvai, nu lua avionul, nu circula pe autostrăzi, nu mergi la cinema. Apoi delfinii, balenele, căprioarele, porumbeii, soldații mărșăluiesc pe străzile orașelor pustii. David Lynch spune că vom fi mai buni, că vom fi mai tandri. Vom fi? David Lynch, filmele tale n-au acoperit asta. Orașele pustii cu milioane de oameni, cu fețele lipite de ferestre, oameni ieșind în liniștea nopții, inspirând cu voluptate aerul, ascultând vântul nopții, trecând printre frunzele copacilor abia înfrunziți, sunetul metalic, clink, 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 al frunzelor lovindu-se unele de altele, oameni furișindu-se ca hoții, speriați că vor fi prinși, călcând cu voluptate pe trotuare. Orașul e un iubit de neatins, trotuarul e pielea lui, hoții de aer de oraș atingând frunze, copaci, băncile goale, apoi blocurile de pe bulevard și oamenii în cadrele ferestrelor privind în gol, sirenele mașinilor de poliție, vântul ridicând în mici turbioane pungile de plastic, etichete, brățări de hârtie la marile concerte care nu mai au loc. Apoi doamna Bovary murind, plângând amar ca o travă după viața ei. David Lynch se apleacă asupra ei și îi potrivește părul pentru cadrul final. David Lynch se așează lângă pat și ia mâna în mâna lui. Amândoi se uită în cadru. Dincolo de imagine, pustiul.
Before dawn, the workers descended into the giant crater, some 30 meters below ground, and manned their stations. The soil was muddy, the diaphragm walls and heavy-duty pumps could barely cope with the groundwater infiltration. Beneath Paris, there was an immense swamp just waiting to surface. The only way to keep it at bay was to pour reinforced concrete over the piles anchored in the bedrock 70 meters deep. The excavators still had a lot of dirt to remove from one corner and were being pressed on by the steel fixers who were tying together the horizontal skeleton of rebar cages. At the opposite end of the building site, the concrete mixing trucks were already discharging their viscous load through long hoses guided into the formwork. The deadlines were very strict. There was no room for hesitation. The operator sipped from his white plastic coffee cup. He drove the excavator bucket deep into the ground, scooped up soil, swung the arm over to the dump truck, unloaded it, and swung back. He was about to sink the steel teeth forward and down again when he saw a man climbing out of the ditch, waving his hands at him. The operator froze the boom in midair. The sudden halt shook the machine violently, and his copy spilled all over the dashboard. He swung the cabin door open and shouted out, "What are you doing there, you bloody idiot? I could have killed you." The man crept up towards the excavator. Apparently, he didn't understand what the operator was saying. The operator grabbed a crowbar from under his seat, lit a cigarette, got down and squished through the dark petroleum jelly-like bog. "Take a good look at this crowbar, because I'm gonna shove it up your arse. You understand that, don't you?" "Ich heiße Otto," said the stranger in a friendly tone and pointed a finger to himself. Otto. Vasile, replied the worker. I'm Vasile. He was Romanian, like all the other workers on that building site. So why are you here? Wir sind in Frankreich, ja? What? Vasile frowned at the 2-meter-tall intruder who had wormed his way out from under the earth, dressed in what looked like a black SS uniform with a swastika band on the left arm and wearing a German helmet with a miner's headlamp on it.
As I said, a flavour, and you can read everything, really, nearly everything this evening. You'll be able to watch and read from the magazine. And because we're celebrating Translation Day as well, I want to say that nearly all the translations have been specially commissioned and have been created for this magazine too. So most of the Timișoara excerpts had not actually ever been translated into English before. So we really did go the extra mile with this, and we're obviously trying to get more and more published in English. Now, at this point, I want to thank Tudor Cretu, and I know we're a very small audience, but hopefully there are thousands of people out there watching. This film is going to go onto YouTube. We have several films that we're making over the next few weeks. And I want to thank Tudor Cretu because he was not only did he help us get the funding, he was also our guest editor in Timișoara, which is why a lot of the magazine is dedicated to Timișoara. However, we didn't want to miss out at all on the rest of Romania, and we also have a lot of material from the rest of Romania. We'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But in order to get the best specialist advice about the rest of Romania, there was only one person I could possibly ask, and you'll probably know who she is. I'm not going to actually introduce her, but she is here in the RCI, a bit like a ghost. She left a year ago. You'll all know who she is.
Warm greetings from Cluj, the unofficial capital of Transylvania, Romania. My name is Gabriella Morkan, and I'm an academic, translator, and cultural enthusiast who has directed and produced various cultural projects globally. This autumn, we are celebrating the Romanian Riveter magazine, a wonderful project on which I am extremely happy and honored to have worked with the European Literature Network UK. As guest editor for the Rest of Romania section of the magazine, since its main focus was the city of Timișoara and its authors, I have narrowed down my list of writers to present some of the biggest names in Romanian letters today, whose books are to appear in English translation in the coming months. Needless to say, there are so many more valuable writings out there for you to discover, and I very much hope that through our joint efforts, British publishers will become more interested in what Romania has to offer. I take this opportunity to personally thank all contributing authors and translators for their great enthusiasm and to encourage readers worldwide to get their own magazine copy and join our riveting Romaniac Club.
Hello from Bucharest. My name is Magda Carneci. I'm a writer and an art historian, and I will be pleased to read you a fragment from my novel Femme, recently translated into English. Corpul meu. Acolo am stat, pe banca verde din parcul orașului, în dimineața pustie și luminoasă, gândindu-mă a mia oară la mine. Ce nu merge? Ce-mi lipsește? Unde-i greșeala? Priveam fără să clipesc, aproape hipnotic, trunchiurile pătate cu alb și brun ale platanilor umezite de rouă. De ce nu sunt mulțumită cu mine? Ce nu e bine? Banca era veche și scorojită, vopseaua verde se desprinsese pe alocuri și lăsa să se vadă porțiuni de culoare mai deschisă, alb-gălbuie, ca de lepră bătrână. Îmi priveam apoi îndelung, cu un fel de aviditate, trupul tânăr, mâinile, brațele, pieptul. Coboram apoi brusc cu privirea spre pântec, de-a lungul picioarelor. Cercetam cu atenție pantofii albi cu vârf ascuțit, de parcă atunci aș fi văzut pentru prima oară. O furnică maronie tocmai traversa grăbită vârful pantofului stâng. Ce mi se întâmplă? De ce nu mi-e bine cu mine? Ce am uitat sau nu înțeleg? Îmi treceau mereu aceleași întrebări obsedante prin minte, în timp ce îmi ridicam încet privirea neliniștită, în sus, pe gambele mele subțiri, îmbrăcate în ciorap transparenți de nylon, apoi pe pulpele ușor arcuite, acoperite de rochia albă cu care eram îmbrăcată. Urcam lent cu privirea din ce în ce mai curioasă peste pântecul femeiesc, vag bombat, ajungeam apoi la corsaj, îmi priveam țintă sânii, de parcă mă minunam de prezența lor rotundă și îmbungătoare acolo, sub rochie. O clipă mi-am imaginat sexul meu mic și plat, strâns între pulpe, indiferent, care nu-mi dădea nicio senzație. Mi-am îmbrățișat apoi dintr-o singură privire trupul întreg, așezat cu minte pe banca verde și ușor umezită. Încercam să-l înțeleg, să-l iubesc. Mi se părea atât de straniu corpul ăsta în care eram închisă ca într-o cutie ermetică. Corpul ăsta gata livrat și absurd, cum crescuse el de la sine, fără niciun efort din partea mea, parcă nu-l recunoșteam, parcă nu era chiar al meu. Mă străbătea un fel de milă uimită, amestecată cu silă față de el. Cine mă băgase în ambalajul ăsta de piele roz-albicioasă, din care nu puteam în niciun fel să mă extrag? Cine mă introdusese fără putință de salvare în uniforma asta de carne, oase și păr, cu părți terminate cu protuberanțe ridicole, cu mâini și picioare terminate cu gheare?
Now, that was Gabriella Morkan, of course, who you all know very well indeed, and she's been an absolute integral part of this magazine, as she calls it, guest editor for the rest of Romania. It sounds very grand. We have, though, our editor for the whole of Romania, for all our riveters here tonight as well, and I want to, at this point, just thank a few people very sincerely who've worked very, very hard on this magazine, and that's Wes Camel over there. And you probably all know Wes, this is our 8th magazine, so, and you've been there not quite from the beginning, but pretty much, and incredibly grateful to you. And to Tudor, we've already mentioned, Stephen Watts is here, who's contributed hugely to this magazine, some major work. You'll be able to see a bibliography at the end. Stephen also wrote an essay for us. Andrea Scridden, who can't be here tonight, she's written a wonderful piece for us as well. And several of you, well, all of you actually have contributed in some way. We've got lots of translation, we've got lots of reviews, and we also have somebody very special. She's called Vesna Goldsworthy, and she and I are going to have a live chat. It's very exciting. Vesna, welcome. Isn't this exciting?
I know.
It's our first live interview because we're both so used to doing this, and here we are for the first time in 7 months or something, 8 months.
Probably. I was just saying I forgot how to walk, I forgot how to hold the mic, but I can speak still just about.
Now, Vesna and I try to avoid each other, but somehow Goldsmith and Goldsworthy always come back together again. And I'm so pleased because we, most recently, we've been Zooming non-stop because we were both judges on the EBRD Literature Prize for 2020. So we spent a lot of time Zooming with our fellow judges. The prize has now been handed on to another group of judges, so do make sure you submit when you have your books. But Vesna and I have a few other things in common, such as we've worked at the BBC for, I worked a little bit longer, you worked there for 10 years, I think. But that's about where it stops. She's a professor, and she's written novels, and she's published books. I've done none of those things. So, Vesna.
Can I just interrupt and say that I like to appear with Rosie on stage occasionally, not just because she praises me like this, but because a lot of people believe that we are actually the same person. So by appearing together, we disprove that.
We do.
And also I always make sure to wear black so that we are like a walking Stendhal novel.
I don't think you'd ever wear red, but anyway, I'm legally obliged to wear red, as you probably know. Now, we've actually called you here for a reason. It's not just because we love chatting, and we do, and we could go on and on, but you are incredibly famous in Romania. You've published 2 novels, and they've both done extremely well in Romania. Why? How? I know they're brilliant novels. I mean, that goes without saying. We know they are. But it's been phenomenal in Romania.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm incredibly famous. I should test people in this room. But the novels have done incredibly well, and I'm absolutely delighted. I think the explanation is probably Humanitas, and probably Denisa Comănescu, my absolutely wonderful editor. I'm so thrilled and honored to work with Denisa and to have my books published by her. And that means that when they are published in Romania, they actually get fantastic people to present them. So Monsieur Karenin, when it appeared at Bookfest in Bucharest last year, was actually introduced by Ioana Nicolae. I get to know about Romanian writers like that. But even going back, before I started my writing career as a novelist, when I was an academic, my books were translated in Romania going back into the late 1990s. So my memoir was translated by Cinziana Dragos of this very institute. So I really go back a long way. And I don't even want to explain it, because if I explain it, then I will destroy the magic. I hope long may it continue.
It's wonderful. No, you people do know your name. I know that for a fact, and I've been to Romania myself so many times. I've seen your books on the shelves, and that brings me to another thing that we do have in common, was we're both Romanophiles. Is that a word? Romaniophiles. Where did it start with you?
Romance.
How did it start for you, your love?
Well, I grew up next door in Belgrade, and in fact, it is strange how history works out, because when I think about my teens, in Central Europe, people talk about the Danube connecting us. But when I was growing up, Danube was separating us. We would take a pleasure cruise, a boat down to Gerdap, and on the other side, I would see these horrible watchtowers with soldiers and hear stories about people swimming across Danube, and occasionally they will fetch up in Belgrade and go further west into Europe. And look how history changes when you think what happened to my homeland and when you think what happened to Romania since. There's a kind of beautiful and paradoxical story. It means that I was always interested in Romania, and when I moved to London and when I started my postgraduate studies at the very beginning of my academic career, I'm a professor in English literature. I wanted to examine representations of Romania in English literature. And I thought that was a very brave endeavor from someone who is Serbian and whose Romanian is incredibly poor. But I found that most of my English colleagues sort of thought that Romanians and Serbs are more or less the same. We understand each other, we speak the same language. It's all the Balkans, what's the problem, right? So what happened was that I was beginning this work in 1989, and I always used to go to Belgrade what I called a holiday between two Christmases. I would take time off for the first Christmas and stay there until the second Christmas. And in 1989, something amazing happened on that first Christmas, if you remember. So I took a train from the Danube station and went on what was my first trip inside Romania. And I remember being, first of all, the Yugoslavs, as they then were, saying, don't go there, it's still shooting. You're really going to end up in trouble. But I ended up in Timișoara and loving it. But loving it in a really, although it was still shooting, the hotel was terribly cold, there was hardly anything to eat, but I loved the city because I recognized it almost as a replica of my homeland. There is a beautiful piece in the Riveter where someone talks about Third Europe. And I think when you visit Timișoara, you understand what that Third Europe means. Because it is Central Europe, but it is Central Europe with that difference, the Byzantine, the multicultural, the very different multicultural from the rest of Central Europe, as it were, the very rich world. And Serbian writer Miloš Crnjanski, who went to school in Timișoara at the beginning of the 20th century, called it Little Vienna. And I always thought that was a compliment to Vienna rather than to Timișoara.
But it's interesting about Timișoara. I mean, it really is a quite wonderful city, and of course all the different languages as well. And you're a great linguist. I mean, you write novels in your third language. Yes. That's right.
Yes, don't test me, my Romanian. But if you speak French, French is my second language, and then you have Church Slavonic, you sort of get an illusion that you can understand Romanian. I was thinking about that because my favorite magazine in Serbia is called Vreme, and every time I Google Vreme to read it, I get Vremea Londra. So I begin to learn Romanian even when I read Serbian resources.
And for me, because I speak Italian, I always sort of pretend that I understand Romanian, and sometimes I do get bits of Romanian as a result. But you, for the Riveter, we asked you to review some poems, and in fact, very cleverly, and you'll recognise the BBC production skills going on here, I called you after the readings by Magda Carneci because you reviewed her poem. She read something different there. But what did you make of her poetry, and what do you? What's your feeling about Romanian literature? Do you have any connection yourself with Romania? Do you read other Romanian writers?
I was thrilled to discover Magda Carneci's work through you, because I wouldn't have known that this, I knew the name, obviously, I knew who she was, but my Romanian is not good enough to read Romanian poetry in the original, and I didn't know that this book was out, which actually tells you something, how hard it is for books to break through. When someone like me who is really interested, the book is out and I don't hear. So I was thrilled to discover it. I was also thrilled to see that it was a bilingual edition, which meant that I could read side by side these poems. And she is a thrilling poet. That whole generation of the 80s is really wonderful. And there is something, I compared Carneci's poetry in the review to Francis Bacon's paintings, because there is something that is both figurative and yet very abstract. Those kinds of images that you keep guessing, but you see what she means. There's a kind of recreation almost of the world, like Munch's Scream, of some kind of world comes into being in her verse. And I was really compelled. It's a wonderful book. I don't need to recommend it to the Romanian audience here, but I was pleased that I discovered it, and I hope that others will discover it through this review and through Riveter. And I have to say, in that sort of sense, that Romania has probably the strongest poetic tradition in Eastern Europe. And I was lucky where I was growing up that a lot of that poetry was translated into Serbian. So I wish that more of it is translated into English, and I hope this will help.
Oh, I absolutely hope so as well too. But thank you for your endorsement, not just of the Riveter, but also of her work is so extraordinary, I think. And so is yours. And I've actually brought along my copy of Monsieur K to get it signed finally. This is the one that's done so well. There are two books, there's Gorski and Monsieur K, and I cannot recommend.
In Romanian, it's called Monsieur Karenin. They went for the full title, which I think was a very good idea, so that the secret of what the story is, because it's the story of the son of Anna Karenina, based here in London. I think that was Denisa was actually right to give it the full title.
Well, I hope also that you will become as famous here as you are in Romania. It should be the case. You are for us. Thank you so much, Vesna.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you.
And Michael, would you be kind enough to give us some more music? Thank you.
Right, so my next piece, it's called Dance and Improvisation. It's my composition. It's a classical contemporary piece. And it's based on a wonderful Romanian folk tune called The Captain of the County, only in Romanian Capitana de Județ.
All this fine English.
All this fine English. And because you talked about poetry and the Romanian language and all that, it's a wonderful, wonderful song. The words are amazing.
Oh, I see. That's better, so people in the back will be able to hear me, yes. The folk tune is called The Captain of the County, and it's the song, its words is about a peasant. He's very poor and he doesn't have any food to put on the table for his family, wife and kids, and he's stealing horses in the night when it was a thunderstorm, and he's caught by the captain of the county, and he's pleading with the captain of the county to be released in song, because he's not a proper or a really thief, he's just trying to feed his kids.
I'm sitting in Wiltshire. My name's Rosie Goldsmith, and sitting in Norfolk is George Sirtish. Now, you'll all know George, I'm sure, and I'm blessed to know him as well as a poet and a colleague. George is a poet. He's a translator from Hungarian. He's a biographer. He's a teacher, and he's an inspirational human being. George was born in Budapest, and he's lived in Britain most of his life after he arrived here as a child refugee, aged 8. Now, George, I've counted about 23 collections of poetry penned by your lovely hand and about 20 translations from Hungarian, major translations. I wonder, do you ever count any of them? Do you know how many?
No, I don't actually. But some of those books of poetry will be selections from previous books. So somewhere in there, yeah, we're roughly in the ballpark.
Does it matter how many?
No.
No. No, I mean...
Only what's good matters.
Well, look, what's good also are the incredible number of prizes you've won, the T.S. Eliot Prize for Poetry, the Weidenfeld, many, many, many. And in 2015, I was lucky enough to be in the audience for the Man Booker Prize International, which you won for your translation with Laszlo Krasznahorkai. Now, of course, Laszlo Krasznahorkai is one of Hungary's greatest writers, and you're his translator, so it's great, that prize too. And then the winner in 2020, this year, of the James Tate Prize for a biography, for your first biography. And not only that, it's the biography of your mother. It's called The Photographer at 16. So congratulations on many counts on that. And also, you've written about your mother in our magazine. George has contributed to the Riveter, the Romanian Riveter, and we're very, very proud that he did. And he wrote a wonderful essay here for us called Reading Timișoara. Now, George, that refers also to a trip that you and I made to Timișoara in 2018. We attended the Litvest International Poetry Festival, which was a blast, I think. Now, let's talk about your mother, because your mother is the Romanian connection. So tell us about her, and then you're going to read a little bit from your essay in the Riveter.
Sure. Well, my mother was born near Cluj, in a small town called Zila, but as an infant they moved to Cluj, which Hungarians know as Kolozsvár, and the various people who lived there at different times all have different names for it. So she was born there in 1924 and lived there till 1940, when at the age of 16 she traveled by herself to Budapest to become a professional photographer, to be apprenticed to photographers, to work in laboratories. So she did. In the process of that, she met my father, who was actually working in a kind of labor camp on the Eastern Front. And then she was arrested and taken off to 2 concentration camps, first of all to Ravensbrück, which was mostly a women's camp. But then fairly shortly, and I think it was lucky for her, she was then transferred to another camp called Penny, where she was working in an aeroplane parts factory, but under very, very bad circumstances, as you can imagine, with concentration camps. So she was very near death when she was released by the American forces. She spent a few months with them recovering, went back, married my father, had me a press photographer, although not for long because she had a very bad heart condition, which she'd contracted at the age of 14. So she couldn't go out on shoots, so she became a lab worker chiefly. But she practiced as a photographer. She won a prize as a photographer. And then in 1956, together with my little brother, she and my father decided to emigrate, to cross the borders at night into Austria. And then we were given an aided flight, because we had absolutely nothing, to England. And that is where we have stayed since. And then she ended her life here by her own hand, mostly, back in 1975, so at the age of 51, which is, seems now, from the point of view of 71, very, very young. And that was her life, and that's what I returned to after many years in order to write the book.
I think so many of us are we're overwhelmed by her story, which I know you took, as you say, a long time to write. I wonder, in this context, did she ever talk to you about Romania? Did she have and what kind of memories did she have of Romania?
She spoke very little about any of her memories, actually. What I do know is that when we were in our early teens, she would sometimes take us to the Romanian embassy, which was surprising. So she had these invitations. She must have been able to speak Romanian, of course, but she never spoke it to us. And we went to events, to film showings and book launches and that kind of thing. And she had ambivalent feelings about everything. I mean, to be fair, she had more ambivalent feelings about Hungary than she did about Romania, because it was from Hungary that she was deported. But she spoke warmly of it, insofar in the little that she said. And so she was, I think, she was a Hungarian ethnic person, but basically a Romanian citizen until finally settling in England.
And you have written a lot about your own past and your own your childhood and your feelings, as well as being Hungarian, and all the experiences you've had over the decades. How important was it for you to go back to Romania?
At one point, it became very important. Returning to Hungary became the first important thing, and that was in 1984. And from that time on, I was caught up in everything Hungarian, with friends, with literary connections, with, of course, translation from that point on. But I knew that at some stage it'd be very good to go to Romania. So I think it might have been 1991 or something like that when we first went. We took a train from Budapest to Cluj, a long and journey with many delays at the time. And I found Uncle Ferry, who I didn't even know existed, who was very kind to us. He was the same age as my father, and he's dead now. And we stayed with Uncle Ferry just for a few days, and he took us around Cluj, showed us the state of the place. And that then became, if you like, a kind of, without that I couldn't have written a book, obviously. And out of that flowed 2 or 3 cycles of poems, because then after that I returned as a British Council scholar. I did a tour of Romania, and since then I've been back to Romania a number of times. I can't remember how often, but as a poet chiefly. And so Romania became a kind of became part of the whole density of experience, really. And it's very interesting. It's a very different place from Hungary, and I think I say a little bit about that in my little introductory essay.
Would you be kind enough to give us a flavour of the essay you've written for the Riveter magazine? And I do encourage people to read the full essay, obviously read the full magazine too. We're so proud of this magazine. It's been produced in lockdown, and against so many different odds, and with so many wonderful writers in it too, including George Sept. So George, over to you for a short reading. Thank you.
Reading Timișoara. My first visit to Romania was in 1993. We were already in Budapest and took a train to Cluj-Napoca, where my mother had spent her childhood. The train was filthy, and the door to the toilet was off its hinges. A very pristine young woman was reading an old history of France opposite us in a compartment. There was a long delay at the border, and when we eventually arrived at Cluj, the station smelled of urine. My long-lost elderly uncle, Ferry, was waiting for us there, and we took a taxi to his flat in the center. I had read and heard a lot about the terrible times under Ceausescu, but Cluj still shocked me. The shops were mostly bare, the streets were cluttered with rubbish, public transport was patched with ill-matched paint, buildings looked dilapidated, and the river was bright orange. I had never before seen so many people with amputations. Cluj looked like a European third world city, a barely working, demoralized dystopia. Uncle Ferry was a darling, but we stayed only a few days, and a return trip by minibus, because the trains were on strike, was a long and tiresome affair through an equally dystopian, despoiled landscape. Pretty soon I was back again, courtesy of a British Council tour of Romania, including a number of other British writers. This then led to further invitations, primarily to the days and nights of poetry at Neptune, but also to Bucharest, and more recently, to Timișoara. I met a great many Romanian poets in such places, mostly extraordinary women, such as Greta Tartar, Liliana Ursu, Ioana Ieroni, Denisa Comănescu, and many others. Romanian poetry, on that evidence, appeared to be chiefly female territory. The result for my personal work was a set of sonnets titled Romanian Brown that appeared in 1998. The impression I gained from my meetings and readings was of Romanian writing as something more elemental and magical, less urban, altogether less Western than the Hungarian work I was familiar with. Whether this impression was based on anything substantial, I cannot say. It was not that the writers, and they were mostly exclusively poets, were not modern. There was little that was formal or traditional, not a word I much like when applied to poetry, in the sense of regularly patterned verse. There was perhaps a deeper appeal to nature, and a kind of ferocity, while the poems were clearly and recognizably modernist in approach. It was just that their material was taking them into different territory, or that they had started from a different territory.
As you can tell, there are some incredible insights, I think, coming through, which I didn't know many of those things that people have been telling me too, and it's been wonderful for me talking to people like George. As you can tell, George Sirtis, who many of you know, he's also in the Riveter, and you can read this wonderful essay he wrote. It's called Reading Timișoara, and if you watch the whole of that film on our YouTube channel, on the Romanian Cultural Institute and the European Literature Network channel, you'll be able to see George reading, but also reading his own poems and other poems as well, connected with Romania. So it's really a treasure trove, and as I say, we can only give you a flavour tonight. Now, you can see there's somebody rushing backwards and forwards all the time, that we're working in tandem, but this evening is only possible because of Mihai, Andrei, because together we've been making these films together, we've been filming all these great people, and a few more to come as well. And Mihai's been editing all this. We've been, sort of BBC. I've been doing my BBC documentary production work as well, and we've done some great things. So thank you very, very much to Mihai, Andrei, and there'll be many more wonderful things to come from him as well. And the other person I want to thank in this kind of visual context as well is Anna Blazak. Now, Anna, along with friends, help, photographers in Timișoara, created this beautiful cover. Anna does all the formatting for our magazine. She taught it all herself. She's a quite remarkable person. She's a poet as well. She's Polish, as you probably know. And she and I have worked together more or less from the beginning of the European Literature Network. So she can't be here tonight. She sends her love to everyone, but she just can't, for various health reasons, be here tonight. She's fine. So I just want to thank Anna very, very much for all the work that she does, and all the people who are connected with everything we do. There are lots and lots of people involved. Now, I don't need to introduce this next one because we have somebody else doing that for us.
You will now hear an excerpt from Ioana Pârvulescu's latest novel, The Prophecy, read in Romanian by the author and translated by Alistair Youngblood in the Riveter. Novelist and cultural historian, Ioana Pârvulescu has established herself as a distinct voice within Romania's literary circles. She is a two-time winner of the European Union Prize for Literature, in 2013 with the novel Life Begins on Friday, published in the UK 3 years later by Istos Books, and in 2018 with the short story The Voice. Several of her novels have been translated into multiple languages, while she herself has translated from French and German books by Milan Kundera, Rainer Maria Rilke, and Maurice Nadeau, among others. Fiona Purpulescu has coordinated the bedside book series, Cartea de Penopieră, at Humanitas Publishing House, worked as an editor for Romania Literară Journal, and is a professor at the Bucharest Faculty of Letters, where she lectures in modern Romanian literature.
Banchetul era întoi și totul decurgea firesc, oamenii erau bine dispuși, mulți se amețiseră deja cu vinul roșu și cu cel alb, care gâlgâia în cupe de îndată ce erau golite, și cu berea care te pișca un pic pe limbă și îți lăsa gura amăruie. Trebuie remarcat întreagăt că în cupele de aramă se turnea cel mai des, iar în cele de aur mai rar, așadar setea creștea pe măsură ce bogăția scădea. Fuseseră aprinse în sfârșit micile opaițe și șarpele cu solți de foc făcea să licărească vasele de pe masă. Buchete de torțe uriașe, așezate în inele de fier, pe ziduri luminau bine și restul încăperii. Apoi s-a întâmplat ceva. Nimeni n-a știut cum. Iute de tot, unele după altele, ca spicele bătute de vânt, capetele mesenilor s-au întors toate spre intrare. Acolo, în prag, sub bolta anacoladă frumos pictată, era o făptură înaltă, dreaptă, crescută parcă din pământ, cu priviri tari de îmblânzitor de fiare. Era proptit pe picioarele ușor desfăcute și se sprijinea de un toiac cu măciulie. Stătea nemișcat ca statuile și, ciudat, ca statuile, încremeniseră și oamenii de la masă, și servitorii și cântăreții. Sargina țipă scurt. După țipătul ei, se opri orice sunet. Era ca într-un basm în care lumea a înghețat și nu mai există mișcare. Doar păsările din colivii își continuau nepăsătoare ciripitul în pomul cu flori galbene. Golită de sunete, încăperea s-a umplut toată de voce. Domnul Dumnezeu mi-a spus, du-te și vestește-le pieirea. 40 de zile. Am venit aici de 20. Mai sunt 20. V-am spus. Faceți ce vă cere Domnul. Rugați-vă. Trebuie. Apoi, vorbele lui au curs și voi. Urechile voastre nu sunt tăiate împrejur și vă faceți că n-auziți. O să piară femeia împreună cu bărbatul și copilul, cu tânărul și cu bătrânii. Loc pustiu se va face din tot ce se înalță acum, cu nerușinare și străpunge și rănește cerul. Și o să are pământul ăsta cu oasele voastre. Urăciunea țâșnește din voi ca izvorul și nimeni nu mai știe să roșească de rușine. Lăcomia vă strânge de gât, toată lumea înșală și fură, nu vă mai săturați. Luciți de răutate și de grăsime. Nu vă pasă de nimeni și nu știți de Dumnezeu. Cum se poate atâta cruzime? Cum se poate atâta nepăsare? Aveți ochi, dar nu vedeți. Aveți urechi, dar nu auziți. Aveți gânduri, dar urâte. Aveți guri și limbi, dar un cuvânt bun nu sunteți în stare să rostiți cu ele. Vai șamar și rușine! Vai de prunci abia născuți! Să-și oprească animalele răgetul și mugetul și țipătul, să-și stăpânească păsările ciripitul și să mă asculte și ele și pământul și aerul și apa. Toți și toate una vor fi, amestecate cu praful și pulberea, căci praf și pulbere se va alege de ce este și trăiește acum.
Another live guest. It's so exciting. Hardly contain myself. Now, this is Susan Curtis. Now, I will tell you a little bit more about her, but the prophecy is that this book is going to be published by Istros Books, and we've given the game away.
I know.
I was hoping you could make an announcement tonight, but
it was up there.
But it was up there. Susan Curtis, publisher, editor of Istros Books, who's published relatively so many Romanian books over the last few years, and I think you've only been beaten by Plymouth University Press.
That's right.
And they published 20 contemporary Romanian authors, as you know, and that's actually how I got to know Romanian writing very early on, because I interviewed a number of those authors in Plymouth. Now, Susan, welcome, and that is one of your authors, Ioana Pavlescu, who we all adore. We love all your authors, but tell me, Istros Books, I know, but tell everybody else. 2011, Istros, Danube.
Yes, I founded Istros in 2011, and in fact, I published 2 titles simultaneously, and one of them was Romanian. So that was basically the first book I published, which was a small book of poetry by Octavian Pală, which I co-translated with a dear friend of mine, Ileana Ștefănescu. And since then, I think I published Cecilia Ștefănescu, Mirceliade, Ludwig Bruchstein, and of course our dear Ioana Pavlescu, yes.
So tell me how this book, Alistair Ian Blythe had actually translated an extract for the magazine, and as you probably saw, this is not in the magazine, this extract, so it was an additional, and then he decided to translate the whole book. So, well, it didn't quite happen like that.
He did. He hasn't told me he'd done the whole book. Has he done it already? I didn't know that.
It doesn't happen that quickly, I don't think. He's very quick, though. So, but he's a translator you've worked with a lot. He's also a remarkable man, who's also written an essay for us in the magazine. So, tell us how you discovered Ioana, how you discover your Romanian writers, and because you don't read Romanian.
No, I don't. No. I discovered Ioana because she was at when she won the EU Prize for Literature.
The EUPL Literature Prize, which they've been holding now every year for about at least 10 years.
At least, yes. And I went to that particular ceremony. I can't remember if it was 2014, 2015, anyway. And I actually went there to sign the Bosnian winner, Faruk Šehić. But when I was there, Ioana was there in the whole ceremony, and of course I was completely charmed by her. Who isn't, right? And I just thought, well, I feel like I just have to publish this novel for this woman. She's just so wonderful. And I did. And Alistair was the translator. I think she must have introduced me to Alistair. I think it was through her that we worked together. And he's a wonderfully sensitive translator, just a joy to work with. And that came out in 2016, Life Begins on Friday. And funnily enough, West, you actually are responsible for the prophecy being published, because I remember you said to me, are you going to publish this? And I said, well, I haven't decided yet, so can you not put it in? And then I saw it was in. And then I thought, damn, I better read the extract. And I read the extract, and I was completely bowled over, because she'd done something so exceptional and so beautiful. And there was a particular line when she was talking about the prayer that Jonah had said when he was in the whale. And she said that his empty words were filled by the voice of God. And I don't know, when I read that line, I just thought, the prophecy, it's prophesized, I must publish it. So I will publish it. I've already talked to Alistair.
It's there on the screen, 2021.
Yes, exactly.
It's going to be published.
It's prophesized in the Riveter.
You have to. But you have, as you've been telling us, published quite a few Romanian novels, and I wonder, and some of them, as with Mircea Eliade and Ludwig Bruchstein, you've actually, you're the first publisher to bring these books to the English language, which is, wonderful that you've done it, because these are major writers. But it's shocking.
It is shocking, yes, it is shocking. It's true. And I think that I've talked about this to people, and I think with Iliade, I think what's to blame, one of the things that might be to blame is the fact that he's known as a professor of comparative religion, and that in the Anglo-Saxon world we like people to fit into boxes, into genres, and therefore how could he possibly be a writer of fiction at the same time? So there wasn't such an interest, whereas of course in French and Italian, etc., he's been published for a long time, his fiction's all been published, but it hadn't been here. And I should also say that there was a big problem with the rights. So it took me 2 years to get the rights for Micheliade's first 2 novels. And I don't know, I suppose a lot of publishers wouldn't have the patience to do that. I really just kept on until I got to the person who owned them.
What about Ludwig Buchstaben? Because that is the extract we've got in the magazine, and a completely new discovery for me. I don't know how many of you knew about him. What a story, though. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, so that Alistair is the person who brought me that story, those
so
stories.
The translator,
Alistair Ian Blythe, yes, the translator. So he wrote to me at some point and said, I've been translating this, in fact, the first time it was 2 novellas, which we published under the title The Trap. And he said, I've been doing this for the son of the author. The author's no longer alive. Why don't you have a look at it? And of course, because I'm quite busy, it took me rather a long time to have a look at it. And when I did, I just thought, well, this is rather magnificent. And the whole story behind it is rather interesting, because he was from Sziget in the Carpathian region, and he was quite a well-known writer before and after also the Second World War. Luckily, he survived the Second World War because he was a Jew in that part of Romania, and he actually was taken to Auschwitz. He was on the same train as Elie Wiesel, but he came back. And he then started a family, and he continued to write. In fact, he was the first person, I believe, to write a fictional account of the is it called Sonderkommando revolt in Auschwitz. He was the first person. He made a play about that called The Night Shift, which I believe has been performed in Romania. In Yiddish and Romanian it's performed. And then he wrote novels, he wrote short stories and other plays. In the 1970s, he decided to emigrate to Israel. He had to leave everything behind. And because he'd done this, he was kind of erased from the national literature of Romania. And then he went to Israel. He didn't speak Hebrew, so he didn't write in Hebrew. And so his work kind of just fell away, fell between 2 chairs, if you like. He did publish in Israel for the Romanian community, but it didn't go beyond that. I think he died in the 80s, and since then his son has been kind of taken on this project to bring him to a wider audience again. So he got him translated into Hebrew. His works were published in Hebrew. Then he's published in French. And now I've done The Trap. And in January, actually on International Holocaust Memorial Day, we will publish the book from which there's an excerpt in the Riveter called, with a wonderful title, With an Unopened Umbrella in the Pouring Rain.
And it is really moving and wonderful writing. He's a really wonderful writer. So very, very grateful to you for bringing those writers to English as well.
I think the interesting thing is about him is that how he manages to get humour in there. Irony, humour, humanity, even though you know, of course, where the story's going to end. Yeah.
But you do like good humour. I mean, Ioana Pavlescu is a very funny writer, for instance. She always makes me laugh and makes me smile. And she's got a great approach. I mean, you really do choose some very, very interesting authors. So I wonder, not just with the Romanian authors, but what is the
selection process?
I mean, no, not so much, but what is the spark for you? And how do you actually choose those books? Because you're an independent one-woman operation.
I know, and
you have to invest a lot of your time, your own money.
It's true. I mean, most of the authors I publish are prize winners, obviously, You know, I published 6 or 7 EU prize winners, and then you have national awards as well.
That helps, doesn't it?
Yes, so because it's a kind of filter that you see who's winning the awards, and then you start to follow those writers and think about what they've written and whether it would be interesting for English-speaking audience. And so it's kind of, but it's often a symbiotic thing that you end up in a place and you meet someone, and you know, like I met Oana at the EU Prize Festival. I mean, that's not for sure, but it often happens like that. And of course, there are so many writers that I'd like to publish, and I really can't do more than about 6 books a year because, as you say, I do it on my own. So yeah,
it's quite a lot, though.
Yes,
that really is.
That's really the maximum.
Well,
yeah.
I'm glad we're able to celebrate you by bringing you here tonight as well, because you do an incredible job, Susan, and I know that all of us here are very, very, very grateful to you as well. And we'll be seeing more of you. We've got a few plans.
That's
hopefully.
right, which you're going to announce later. Yes, indeed.
And also do read this extract by Ludwig Bruckstein, published by Istros Books in the Riveter magazine. For the moment, Susan, thank you very, very much indeed.
You.
And just to say, before we have the next little clip, I think we've got another wonderful writer who you'll immediately know, a Romanian writer. And if you want to see any of these films, as I say, and the whole, you know, all the recordings, all the readings that we've done, do go onto the websites. And if you want to follow this particular writer, I can't remember which page it is, but you'll all know who he is. He's just, we're very lucky tonight, we really are.
Hello, my name is Matei Vișnec. I'm a Romanian playwright. I'm a French as well playwright. I write in French. This play, I wrote it some years ago. It was dedicated to Eugene Ionesco. And it's about the communism, the dictatorship in Romania in the 50s. I will write in Romania a scene from this play. There are many characters in this scene. The characters are a poet, a philosopher, a former judge, a former ministry. All 4 are in the prison. And they are called from the director of the prison for an interrogatory. Poetul, filozoful, fostul magistrat și fostul ministru sunt chemați la raport de directorul închisorii. Comandantul: vă mai întreb o dată, că poate n-ați auzit, de ce v-ați hăhăit toată noaptea de sâmbătă spre duminică? Ascult? N-aveți nimic de spus? Deținut pe Negaru, ți-am pus o întrebare, nu? Poetul: da, tovarășe comandant. Păi, aștept un răspuns. N-a fost chiar toată noaptea, tovarășe comandant. Mă iei peste picior deținutul? Nu, tovarășe comandant. Bă, mă cam iei peste picior, tovarășe deținut. Ba nu, tovarășe comandant. Ba da, ați avut tupeul să râdeți în hohote într-un penitenciar comunist. Ați îndrăznit să râdeți în hohote într-o închisoare de stat, într-un stabiliment de reeducare. Vreau să știu din ce motiv ați râs până la ora 4 dimineața. Deținut pe Negaru, te ascult. Filozoful: păi, am povestit și noi niște amintiri. Comandantul: ați povestit și voi niște amintiri? Filozoful: da, am. Comandantul: tacă-ți flanca. Vezi că știu că minți. Reacționar viermanos ce ești. Vă mai pun o dată întrebarea la toți 3. De ce ați râs de s-a auzit în tot penitenciarul timp de 3 ore fără încetare? Dacă nu am imediat răspunsul cel bun, treceți toți 4 în regim de izolare timp de 2 luni cu o cană de apă și o bucată de pâine uscată pe zi ca regim alimentar. Comandantul: ei? Ați povestit bancuri politice, este? Filozoful: nu, fostul ministru. Nu, fostul magistrat. Nici vorbă. Poetul: eu sunt de vină. Am povestit o piesă. Comandantul: o ce? O piesă de teatru. O piesă de ce? O piesă de teatru din alea care se joacă la teatru. Mă, voi vă bateți joc toți 4 de mine, vă bateți joc, mă. Nu, tovarășe comandant. Și mie nu-mi place, mă, să-și bată joc cineva de mine. Filozoful. Tovarășe comandant, nimeni nu și-a bătut joc de dumneavoastră. N-am îndrăznit noi să ne batem joc de cei care au în sarcină reeducarea noastră. Deținut pe Negaro, ia fă un pas în față. La ordine dumneavoastră, tovarășe comandant. Deci, spune ce ai povestit exact. Poetul. Am povestit o piesă de teatru citită de mine înainte de arestare. Și de ce au râs ăștia 3 așa tare? Pentru că e foarte comică, tovarășe comandant. Bine, atunci povestește-mi-o și mie ca să râd și eu. Poetul. Păi, povestesc mai că e o piesă puțin diferită, ține de, cum să zic, e teatru absurd. Teatru absurd la noi, în România.
And just very quickly, I want to thank Mihai Cretu so much for his music tonight. We've got one last piece from Mihai and then we've got a small special treat at the end. Thank you, Mihai. We're ending on some poetry, and it's also a reflection of our links with Timișoara, with the poetry festival there, the Litfest festival in Timișoara. So we'd like to say again thank you to everyone in Timișoara, all the poets, and we've got all the recordings, and the whole Timișoara Litfest festival is also available if you want to sit there for hours and watch everything. You'll be very, very welcome. But we're going to end on probably Romania's most famous poet, and we have a very exclusive reading from her coming up. But first of all, we have one of the UK's most famous poets talking about her with me. Hello everyone, it's me again, and I'm in Wiltshire, at home in Wiltshire, and I'm going to introduce you to one of my favourite poets who's at home in Herefordshire, Fiona Sampson, and greetings to you. And to you, Rosie. Fiona is a poet, a writer, a teacher, professor of poetry, founder of festivals, an editor, an indefatigable supporter of poets and poetry around the world, including Romania. Now, I don't know how many books exactly, but I got to about number 28. Fiona's published about 28 books, and then I gave up. So she is very widely published and very widely translated as well. And she's written most recently one book I absolutely adore. It's the brilliant biography In Search of Mary Shelley. So it's a double, treble, quadruple joy to have Fiona Sampson with me today. And Fiona's also contributed to the Romanian Riveter. So, and you in the Romanian Riveter, Fiona, we're talking about Ana Blandiana. Now, tell me about your interest in, your love of Romanian literature, your love of Romania, and then introduce us to Ana Blandiana's poetry.
Well, it's such an enormous thing to talk about, and thank you for this, Rosie. I've always loved writing from around the world and writing that's been translated from different languages. I think there's a certain sort of, I don't know, a fifth or sixth dimension that translation adds. There's an extra mystery to translated poetry. I mean, it's through a glass darkly. There are lots of discussions about how you can't translate poetry and it's what's lost in translation. But I think that the very best work, like the Riveter, can add a dimension rather than lose it. And when around the end of the last century, terrible thing to say, I started work as a director of the Stephen Spender Memorial Trust. I was the first person in that post. Wonderful job, fascinating. So the program that I was asked to set up was scouting for writers to support into publication in this country from post-communist Europe. These were the countries which we then called the EU accession countries. They weren't yet even part of the EU. And it was prose and poetry. It was wonderful. And one of the first things that I did was to go to a British Council conference on the Black Sea at Ovidius, where I met lots of Romanian writers, including the also indefatigable Denisa Cominescu, a great editor and poet, not necessarily in that order, with whom I plotted to set up Orient Express, which was contemporary writing from the, as we called them then, EU enlargement countries. That was another of our names. And that was just wonderful because I started scouting for writers for the magazine. I was scouting for writers for the Stephen Spender Trust program. I met so many amazing people, and I was absolutely bowled over by the literatures I encountered. Their range, their ambition, particularly in the poetry. It was a time in Britain of British kind of cool Britannia poetry, not very risk-taking, not always so high stakes. And then there was this kind of blast of passion and colour and importance and engagement from the countries that I was exploring, particularly Romania, where I was particularly excited by the fact that most of the leading poets at that moment were women. They had been allowed to be, and they had been allowed to be poets who, as it were, spoke aloud, spoke about politics, spoke about metaphysics, spoke about life and death, and not only about the linen cabinet and falling in love. You know, they spoke about stuff that really mattered, and they weren't demure, and they were risk-taking, and they ranged from the sort of postmodern, someone like Magda Kernech, to Ana Blandiana or Mariana Marin, who had really strong, I mean, humbling backgrounds in political direct activism, and it was also in their work, to someone like Liliana also, who is so beautiful and spiritual, I mean, a deeply religious writer. So I just felt as though the scales had fallen from my eyes, and there was so much to see and learn.
Well, I mean, that makes me feel very excited as well, too, because, I mean, what you've done is not just champion them, but you've also enjoyed reading them, I know, as well. And one of the reasons we asked you to look at the poems of Anna Blandiana is because I know you love her very much indeed. And you've said that you will read a couple for us for our launch. So fire away. And if you could just introduce the poems as well, that would be great.
I'd love to. Obviously, I'm going to read from the Riveter. And so these are translated by Viorica Pater, who came to Ledbury with Anna Blandiana when I curated the Romanian Women Poets sessions there. And they came and had a wonderful Sunday lunch in the Herefordshire countryside. We wandered up and looked at our sheep and picked cherries and ate them together with Paul Scott Derrick. And I thought that I'd read one early poem and one middle period poem from Anna's work. The first time I ever heard Anna read was in Ljubljana Castle at the Villanica, the big poetry festival there. And she was, I think, the laureate that year. And she had this extraordinary presence with this very quiet, feminine, still voice, but she was reading these high stakes poems. And she was saying, in a sense, with her voice, the personal is political and the political is personal. I am a person, never mind, including in what I write. So I'd like to begin with this early poem, Oh Your Body, which is published in 1972, which is indeed about the very personal. Oh, your body. Oh, I still see your body through the ink that stains us even in our dreams like bitter animal sweat. I want to reach you, and my fingers slide. I can hardly see you. I can hardly hear you. Tell me once more that the whirlpool I plunge into darkens us both the same. I call to you, but the ink runs violently out between us as though from a wound. Do you still know me? Still wait for me? Will you still let me go back? Will you still receive me from the purple mud? Will you still come back to these blue fields, the desert seas, speechless and in tears, so I can offer my trembling mouth and lips, bruised with words, to your kiss? It's amazing, the colorist work in that poem as well. And this is it's still quite an early poem, 1990, so published just after Ceausescu was deposed, but obviously written before he was. This is Omphalos. A stone is a god that moves so slowly, my swiftly dying eye cannot perceive the motion. As we cannot ask a wave, a cloud, to understand the ocean. When everything collapses and afterwards dissolves into a poisonous mixture of yesterday and tomorrow, a stone is a seed of the world still alive, the shriveled sense that remains, omphalos and bud, from which the whole murdered universe will grow again, when the God that was shattered into equal stones will rise up as a barricade. And I think, Rosie, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about how strongly Anna's work speaks to us, you know, in terrible times. I mean, it's beautiful work, but it speaks to us, for example, now during the pandemic, even though clearly this is a poem about a world that's ending under the absolute cruelty of that dictatorship.
For all of us, the dictatorship is still there. The trauma of that time is definitely there. But I must say, reading these poems again today, I feel quite a chill. I mean, the murdered universe.
Absolutely.
It's, you know, things are happening which we have no control over. And it's chilling.
It's chilling. And I think that thing, amazing thing she does, where she does this kind of thought experiment so that the stone is actually a living god. It's living. It's just that it moves a bit too slowly for us to be able to see it. We are too swift. We are too fleeting. That slowing down of our mental picture of time is extraordinary.
Have you heard about the living stones, by the way, of Romania? Because it's fascinating that this particular poem, because the festival's name for the whole festival, it's called Romania Rocks. And not just about the dreadful alliteration, for which I apologize, and for the fact that Romania does rock, as you and I know. It's about these stones that exist in Romania, really special part of Romania. They are actually living, moving, growing stones. And I do wonder sometimes when I hear that poem whether actually Anna Blandiana was thinking of those. You should have a look online. Yeah. Our logo actually reflects the rock.
That's very interesting. Because rock is growing, isn't it? I mean, you know, sedimentary rock is still being laid down. And remember, actually, a Japanese poet saying to me once at a festival, "Oh, you know, when are rocks still being made? Are rocks still growing?" And of course, your first answer is no, of course not. They're not. But the second answer is, well, yes, they are, aren't they? Every time there's a volcanic eruption, there's more lava, which becomes basalt. Yes, and we're
fascinating.
Yes, we're on a more mutable planet than we would perhaps like, aren't we?
I am Anna Blandiana. This is my last book with all my poems, all my life. And I will read, I'm in Bucharest, and I will read from here, from my home. Trupul tău. Trupul tău, îl văd printre cerneală, cerneală înămolindu-ne și în somn, ca o sudoare acră, animală. Vreau să te ajung și degetele-mi lunecă, nu te mai văd, abia te aud, spune-mi, mai spune-mi că la fel ne întunecă vârtejul în care mă afund. Te chem, dar violent ca dintr-o rană, cerneala izvorăște între noi. Mă mai cunoști? Mă mai aștepți? Mă mai îngădui înapoi? Mă mai primești din vânătul noroi? Mai vii peste câmpii albastre? Mări pustii, înlăcrimat și mut, ca să-ți pot întinde o gură tremurată spre sărut, cu buze învinețite de cuvinte. Omfalos. O piatră e un zeu care se mișcă oricât de încet, încât ochiul meu repede, muritor, nu-i în stare să-i recunoască mișcarea. Așa cum nu poți să-i ceri unui val, unui nor, să înțeleagă ce-i marea. Când totul se năruie și apoi se dizolvă într-un toxic amestec de azi și de mâine, o piatră e sâmburul lumii, viu încă sensul chircit ce rămâne, omfalos și mugur din care întreg universul ucis va mai crește odată, când zeu împărțit între pietre egal se va strânge într-o baricadă.